Okay, today is the 9th day of August 2020, and my title for this talk is So how did they, that is, how did those, the priestcraft and the government have kept us in darkness? How did they do it? This all began, basically, I'm going to say the year zero. They created another calendar, so to speak, to start, and it starts at zero. Some of that's based upon, that is, Jesus Christ, that he was born that time period. I think that's just a fictional story, just to develop this particular age, the age of Pisces, the age of the water world, the age of putting man in his under bondage in a greater way in order to produce the new world order. So let me explain this. They created the Christianity. They created also Islam. They also, in the issue of Western world, they created, they had the language of Latin. So they created a book, a Bible, so to speak. They call it the Holy Bible. Why would you need to call it holy in the first place? If it was the Bible being true, why would you put holy in front of it? It wasn't so holy, that is. It was a way of fooling people. The scriptures wasn't for the people, so they weren't going to give you the truth no matter what. And eventually when they do give it to you, how do you know it's the truth? You see. And along, I guess, the Middle Ages, well, a lot of this started with Constantine. You see, blending of the church and state, what I call the priestcraft of being with the government. Basically, the church and state in bed together, working together to keep people in bondage. There are a few heroes that spoke out to against this. There was what I call the Anabaptists, A-N-A Baptists, not anti-Baptist, but Anabaptists. It's just a name that was given to them by their enemies. They opposed baptism, but they also believed that church and state should be separate. That's what the United States is supposed to be built upon, a separation of church and state. Before then, it basically the church and state worked together, the government and the church, to keep people in bondage. There are others that I would talk about in a short place, simply Jan Hus, Czech, who spoke out against the system and had a courageous, somewhat courageous prince at one time, until he was threatened that he would be would not see the kingdom, and that he would be himself be thrown in the pit of hell. This is how much power these people had. The threat of hell was used so many times. And then there were also what I call separatists. There were certain groups that actually met, what I would call movements. And also there were groups of people who were meeting together to oppose the almighty power of the Holy Catholic Church. And also the creation simply as the Protestant Reformation. Reformation seems reform. Reform means simply is not, again, reform just means reforming it. So they didn't get to the base of the problem. So the Reformation churches that were involved, the Calvinist Church, the Lutherans, the Presbyterians, all those, since then, since the 1700s, was again to keep you in bondage. It was simply a branch of the Holy Catholic Church. If you look at what the beliefs are, they are similar in many ways, and to the Catholics, most of them have a different perspective on baptism. Some of them have different perspectives of different things, but if you look at what is going on, it's still bondage. Mainly to keep you in bondage of your soul, and then also to keep you bondage in working, that you never have the time to even look into anything to find out if this is true or not. You're just sort of soldiering through and moving on with life, and you're being kept from basically seeing anything that they don't want you to see, you see. Yes, I was mentioning the Anabaptists, that they were separatists. They had a belief system simply is that the state, they would not participate in the state. They felt that it was ungodly. And they did not believe in the church that is the Pope per se. They were not into theology as much as the other churches were in the Reformed faith. Anabaptist was a radical Reformation, as some would say. Some would say the radical left. It just was simply had a different perspective and had a different connotation. I think that they were on somewhat the right path, but they got they were butchered. I don't think people realize that they were butchered by the Catholics and the Reformers, all of them. They didn't have any friends whatsoever. They were like I compared it like a shooting star in a night sky. It was there, bright for a little while, and it was gone. And when the German Baptists, those and the Amish and Mennonites that came here in America, they basically compromised their viewpoint and are basically considered evangelicals today in order for them to live on the land. They are separatists in a lot of ways. Kudos to them in some ways that they live and still live off the land, knowing that simply as land in some ways provides you freedom and not being dependent upon corporate farms and that type of thing. And then they created the United States for a tool, and the United States has been a military tool and an economic tool for those who want the world order. The United States is a military power, and the military power that we will use in the United States, especially in the last 100 years, a little bit longer than that, actually. Actually, since the war between the states, the United States drastically changed, and that was on purpose. This is not a joke, folks. This is truly what they plan. All these things I'm telling you about is their purpose and how these things have happened. It is a purposely planned. It was meant to keep you in darkness and bondage. And darkness means spiritual, and bondage means simply is that you are spiritually, in bondage. You don't know the truth. Also, you got to work all your life. That's all you do, just to keep your head above the water. When God knows we could live off of 40 acres of land, everyone could have that, and there still would be plenty of land. But no, they choose to rule and take it all. Is what they do. They're despicable, is what they are. They're the bottom of the barrel, okay? Anyway, so the United States is used in many ways politically, militarily, and economically in a way, and we're seeing that it's coming apart here in the United States. We're spending money that we don't have and never will have, just going to create what I call enormous inflation for the people. It's going to be basically going to have to protect one another and help one another, and be brothers and sisters, because we're going to have to help one another. Okay, these truly are the last days, and they're getting ready for the next age. They've already made plans. They're moving the Catholic Church, the power of the Vatican, moving to South America and to Peru. That's their plans, and they will be hoping to be a part of the air sign, which is heaven, to fool others. Again, trying to. So, as I've talked about these things in a brief outline, I want to share how this works. They created Christianity. They created the God-man, Jesus. They created the doctrines of the church, the dogmas, in order to keep people from coming to the truth. They destroyed paganism. Those that believed in many gods, they destroyed paganism. They destroyed many libraries in the Middle East. That was where the cradle of knowledge was at that point. And there was a huge library in the city of Alexandria. They plundered it and then burned it. And the so-called Catholic Church destroyed other religious groups. Manichaeans eventually were disposed of. Those who were a part of the original Catholic Church and then broke off, they were disposed of. They were destroyed. There were others who were smaller groups. Some were what I call semi-Pelagius or Pelagius, believing simply is that your works is what counts, not not the grace that Augustine taught, which is what we're living in. We live in an age of grace and mercy, which we do. That's why many people get away with what they get away with. There is no justice at all. It's just us. That's basically what I see. We're on our own. And so they destroyed anything. And at one time, simply as they were involved and truly involved. Not only interesting fact, simply as this cradle whole thing came in the Middle East, and actually it affected Europe. It affected most of all of Russia, and parts of Northern Africa, and eventually would affect the United States and pretty much almost all the world. I would say that probably the only part that has not been messed with as much has been somewhat powerless would be the area of China and Japan and India are probably the key areas. The rest of the world has been indoctrinated with the two major groups I just spoken of, Islam and Christianity. Judaism was before this, so although simply, again, based upon a one mega God, not many gods, but one God, persistent thinking. The whole idea here is to keep man in bondage, physically and spiritually, so that he never comes to see the truth and reality of what situation he's in. So part of that is to do with the Latin language. They did not speak the vernacular to the people in the Catholic Church at first. It was kept that way for for 1,000 years at least, if not longer. Okay, so and if there was a so-called Bible, there was one Bible for the whole church, and you are not allowed to read it if you could read it. Okay, I want you to follow that. So this is ultimate darkness. This is why we call in church history the Middle Ages the Dark Ages. The Dark Ages, in certain ways, was that basically we don't know much about it. It's one thing. Very little took place, or either was it created a 1,000-year period. There are many theories. My theory is that they just simply kept people in darkness. That is, people went along with it. And so most of this continued on. And only with the onset of what I would call the Renaissance, the creation of simply is putting some of these Latin texts into Greek texts, and eventually putting those Greek texts or Latin texts into the vernacular of the people. But again, you have to understand, again, it's to still keep you in bondage. They have their priestcraft here. They're working together. The church and the state are working tremendously together. Okay, that's why even today, here in America, that the church doesn't pay taxes. So they're not responsible in that area. And those who give to the church as a taxpayer or charitable deals are not compensated, but are not taxed upon that. Okay? So you see how this works? This is all working in congruence to what their plans are. Even today, that people still pay their taxes and they take a charitable amount, such and such. I know that there's a couple people I know that simply they write out checks at the end of the year and give it to a charitable organization or a church or missionary deal so they can get credit. You see, it's not based upon doing what's right. It's based upon what I can get, hopefully, back. One of the heroes I would think simply would be Pelagius. Early on, he's probably what I would consider the major hero of that era in the age of 400. And he's the one who basically said very clearly, says, excuse me, folks, I have a problem here. Yes, we sin, we do wrong. And I'm not saying Pelagius is correct in every aspect here, folks. I want you to understand that, okay? He was a monk that came from England, arrived in Rome, saw the despicable way people were living, and he said, "This is not what I'm teaching here as a monk in England." So I'm not saying he was perfect. I'm just saying simply he's one who stood against the system, and he's probably the most important one to stand against the system. There were others who stood, but they were, as to say, basically they were minor players compared to what we see with Pelagius. In fact, Pelagius is a dirty word in the church. Still is. You bring up that word and you're accused of heresy almost immediately. Most people don't even know who Pelagius is. Pelagius is one who wrote books, had education, could understand things, knew that simply the church, supposedly what he had thought was wrong, was no longer carrying out. He simply says that you can save yourselves. That was his whole purpose in what he shared. Not that some God's grace is given to us and benevolently keeps us from sinning. In fact, he saw quite the opposite. People were living completely in the world as he saw it. So Pelagius is the key. The key is simply eventually Pelagius gets support eventually. Well, first he gets support from a pope at that point, but that was short-lived when Augustine began to write and push his arguments, and others began to push also to find Pelagius to be a heretic. This is critical for you to understand. He is the last Jargonaut, or last bastion to stand against the church, because once he's done away with, and he is actually, I would think, wasn't killed, he was excommunicated, I think, to Egypt. We don't know anything more about him. They made sure of that. His writings are pretty much, they're all gone. There are some writings that he has with those who agree with him, that someone has digged into about a century ago and has found some writings of Pelagius, but there's very little about his teachings at all. And so he was put in the dustbin of history. They made sure of that, and his books were all burned. And eventually there were threats to those who actually followed him. And eventually they were also banished. But what also took place here is that Augustine was prominent in the church. He ran all over. He ran the church in a lot of ways. And because he was scholarly, he was a brilliant man, that is, thinking wise, and he created Christianity to what it is today. Before this, there was more of a hodgepodge of belief systems that were going on. That's all changed when Augustine's teachings are taught. Augustine is the one who recommended that basically that those who were of the church and the false church that he saw was to delete them, to get rid of them. And that's what they did. They had the army of Rome to eliminate those that did not go along with the teachings of Augustine and Christianity. Later on, we have what I call the Renaissance, and the Renaissance period is the supposedly flowering, because it simply is that finally the doors are opening up in order so people can educate themselves. This is also writings are starting to come out in the cult world. That is, writings that are still forbidden by the church. They're written under synonyms. Their names are not the true names a lot of times, because they're threatened. Okay, they're threatened. They're threatened big time if they are exposed and find out who they really are. So they are considered also heretics. We also know that that there were those who were used, and I believe this is true, that they worked in some way in capacity with the church somehow. And I believe that Luther was involved, and I believe that Calvin is involved also. I don't know much about Zwingli. I don't know much where his connotation is, because eventually he dies, in fighting in Switzerland for the Swiss army. He fought there and he was killed. So I don't know a lot about who Zwingli is. He's considered one of the fathers of the Reformation period, but he had a short life. Before Luther and took place, there was a guy named Jan Hus, and he was from Czech, and he's the one who basically started to question many things and supposedly thought that he was going to be protected by his prince, and then eventually his prince was threatened just like others were, and John Hus was burned to the stake as an arch heretic, an ultimate heretic. His teachings were false, according to the Catholic Church. But there are some inroads that are taking place here, but the problem is simply most of those inroads are taking place now is with the religion of Protestantism. As Protestant grows, Catholicism is not growing as fast, and so Protestants are becoming a major part, especially in the New World, especially in the United States, where it takes root here. And how they use it to basically, in some ways, as to use the United States as a tool for the New World Order. The United States has been actively involved since after the Civil War, to do more on the military fronts than anything else. The United States is involved in foreign wars. And that foreign wars starts with what took place at the battleship Maine, supposedly being exploded by the Spaniards in Cuba. I don't think that's true. Okay? I think it was created to create another way of destroying, to take over what I call Spain's holdings, especially Cuba and the Philippines. It's amazing what took place and how we were involved and how quickly we were involved in the Philippines also in fighting there. So you have what I call right before this time, you have what I call presidents that are, especially Grant and others, who are beginning to listen to big business and big bankers, and you're seeing the enormous pressure of the industrial world as the United States is going away from the agrarian world, planting, growing foods, and people are being what I call seduced to get off the land and to go and work in cities and factories in order to make money. It's interesting that money was there, but now it's really pushed. And so it's pushed in the cities, and that's where the mills are and the plants are and industrial capacity, and where electricity will eventually take place also. And so as this is taking place, more and more people are becoming more and more dependent upon industry. And now they're not able, later you'll see this is all done on purpose, folks. This has all been done for a reason. This is not by accident. All of this is taking place in the last 2 centuries is where we're at now. Okay? Get that in your head. Figure it out. Understand all these things have been done on purpose to get us to this point. It's to destroy mankind is what it's all about. And so people moved off the land. No longer farmers. If there were farmers, there were few of them, fewer than there were before. And as it continued on in the late 1890s, you start seeing the power of corporations and banks. And eventually they create administration and push a gentleman named Woodrow Wilson by a gentleman named Colonel House, who produces and pushes the ideas that we need a Federal Reserve, which is not federal and is not a reserve. It's strictly a bank for those, the independent wealthy banks, to steal from those like us. Look at it, folks. Colonel House was the one involved. Manuel House was the one involved. Wilson was just a Dumbo that went along with it. He just went along with it, not understanding what was really going on. He was filled with as though he had enormous education, which he did, but he was being played. Okay? Later on, we know that Theodore Roosevelt, before that, Roosevelt was involved. Theodore Roosevelt. And you can see how the centralization of of the United States is taking place as the federal government is becoming larger and larger, and state governments are becoming what I call very dependent upon the federal government. And that process has been going on for the last 100 years here in America. And so what takes place is the United States gets involved in a war when we have no business to be involved in a war. Theodore Wilson was involved. Woodrow Wilson, I'm sorry, was involved. We first were involved in the Battle of Maine. We were involved in Dominican Republic. We were involved in Haiti. We were involved in Guatemala. All these countries on military expeditions and are doing it for corporatism, taking, okay? It's not strictly to do with what I call Guatemala is a threat to us, folks. It's always been about taking from others and forcing them to do what we want to. And a lot of it has to do with United Fruit. You can look at that in Guatemala and what took place in Haiti. We were there for 30-some years, you know, just being there. Dominican Republic, the same thing. So we picked on these little small countries. We're involved now in all countries in South America. We're flanking. We're disposing of certain governments that we don't agree with. They're a threat. And we do away with them. In the First World War, we come along and we're involved in there later in the part. And it's because Wilson's involved that eventually we get involved. And then afterwards, they create what they call 14 points. Those didn't come from Wilson. Those came from those who wanted to bring about the New World Order. And so they kept pushing that idea, and it didn't succeed in the United States, thank goodness. But the United States was pressured in the 30s. Later on, the great economic collapse, stock market crash, whatever you want to call it, was a way of pushing more and more Americans to be dependent upon government now. Socialization, communism in a lot of ways. And the United States has not seen what it used to be. It's gradually moving in a different direction. Okay? And most of the people are not even aware of what's going on. And Franklin Roosevelt is another terrible president who pushed the policies of socialism. And he didn't care. He was all he cared about was himself. Okay? And being in the front. Eventually he figures out he's been played too. And I believe that he was killed because he disagreed with eventually to do what I call bombing of Tokyo. I mean, not Tokyo, but Japan with nuclear weapons. And so he didn't go along with that, and that's basically where his days are over. And so Truman comes in and he does the job. And we have another president who's a wartime hero that, again, is considered as Eisenhower, and he's now used as against the two major deals, the powers, military powers, the Soviet Union, the United States. So there's this Cold War going on, but it's gradually weeding upon. The United States is involved militarily in almost all over the place now. Our Navy's all over the place. We are building up, spending money on that, fighting communism, supposedly, when in reality we had communists in our own government that were pulling the strings. It was a way of, it's another, dog and pony show, per se. So that created this problem. And we know this simply is we got involved in Vietnam. It was another play. It was a war, not about saving anybody in Vietnam. It was to do with the battle with the drugs that were taking place, and that's what it's about. It's about drugs, okay? And with that, people become delusional, beginning to feel that, hey, what's going on? And so Johnson, the president, comes in and says, we're going to have a great society. And in reality, simply we're spending money and butter. And eventually, what great country you had is gradually beginning to go downhill. It's no longer being financially responsible anymore. We're involved in all kinds of wars, battles, and overthrowing countries. Also trying to appease and help people here in the country that financially, because business is not what it used to be. And then in the 1970s, with Nixon coming in power, he does some things, some major things that take place. One was simply is that he destroys what I call the private or county hospitals. And when I say not private, I'm sorry, I meant the county hospitals in the country. And what takes place there simply is that what we call corporate hospitals now, which are dominant now. There's no county hospitals anywhere around where I live at. That was what I was born in. Completely different world there. It's all about money. I can tell you a lot of stories about what it's like in being in a small county hospital compared to what it is today. You're just a number. That's all you are. Just a number, folks. And that has gradually led us to this where we're at. The economy continues to fall apart because we have bankers who are wasting money, creating money out of nothing. They're gambling on all kinds of speculation, which is also taking place in this country and is destroying this country piece by piece. They're dividing people based upon colors. They're doing this all on purpose to destroy mankind. And the last deal here in the last 6 months, maybe less than that, is to do with this phony CV-19 deal to, again, use fear and to destroy mankind and to eventually destroy every way that there's anybody opposing it to destroy them. So that's the synopsis in about 30 minutes here, a little longer, of what has taken place in the last 2,000 years. I hope that you will grasp and dig for these things, see these things, what they're going on. This is, as Roosevelt said something, nothing occurs by accident. It was planned that way, and it's correct. It never occurs by accident, never has. It's always been planned this way, folks. It's always been that way. It has never been by some stupid accident. All these things playing out, even today, are not by accident. The media itself is involved tremendously, and those of you that are promoting this, you're guilty. You're tremendously guilty of destroying what is happening in our world today. You are. You're guilty, and you're going to pay for it dearly. Okay, because there's going to be justice going to eventually render in this whole atmosphere. Anyway, I know it's long. I enjoy sharing this with you because this is a brief synopsis of how these things happen. But it didn't happen by happenstance. They were all done on purpose. We know that Luther was involved in some type of group. I think he was involved in the Masons. I don't know where Calvin was and all, but I do know that Luther was involved in that type of thinking. Anyway, I appreciate your attention, and I would appreciate you giving a thumbs up. I would like to see people sharing this information to those. Stop being fearful, folks. Stand up. It's the only way to be. Thank you.